They were targeted. It was an execution.
A brutal killing.
There was a blood trail all the way out from his room to the front door.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
We started to focus in now on that 24 hours of who they may have been in contact with.
He would make statements like he wanted to kill them, that they deserved to die.
She had made threats that she was going to come by and shoot up his law firm.
He has the ability to gain the entire, very successful business. We're talking millions and millions of dollars.
The truth will be revealed.
I said, two things are going to happen today. I'm going to go home tonight, and you're going to go to jail for murder.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Coral Gables, a haven of wealth and luxury nestled a few miles south of Miami.
It's beautiful. I mean, Coral Gables is considered, I think they call it like the little Venice of South Florida because of its waterways.
Safe and usually quiet.
In the city of Coral Gables, murders are very few and far between.
But in August 2004, that peace is violently shattered.
Coral Gables 911.
They shot me.
They shot you?
Yes.
With what?
I don't know.
When uniformed officers from the Coral Gables Police Department arrived on the scene, they were met at the door by John Sutton.
He's bleeding from the head. They see wounds to his hands and possibly the shoulder. They ask him what's going on. He says, I'm not sure, I've been shot. And they ask him if there's anyone else inside the house. And he says, yes, his wife.
Inside, police discover a bloodbath.
We found a major blood scene in the southeast bedroom, which was where John was. There was a blood trail all the way out from his room to the front door. We located Susan Sutton in the southwest bedroom in bed where she was shot and she was obviously deceased.
John had been shot multiple times in the face. He was in pretty bad shape. He had to be transported immediately to the hospital.
As John is raced to the ER, Miami-Dade homicide detectives Rosanna Cordero-Stutz, Larry Bellew, and Art Nanny are tasked with finding Susan Sutton's killer. They must now uncover every significant detail from the last 24 hours of her life.
Establishing a timeline is absolutely critical because you have to have some sort of foundation upon which to build a case. You have to know where someone was before they were murdered, what they were doing, who they were with, because all those things can lead to a potential suspect.
Their top priority is to speak with the sole survivor of the attack, John Sutton. But he's in critical condition, undergoing 14-hour emergency surgery.
We don't know John's gonna make it. In fact, our suspicion is John is not gonna make this. We're looking at a double homicide.
I was doing bad. No doubt from the loss of an excessive amount of blood. I was given last rites the next day, Monday morning, and also the next day, Tuesday morning. Somehow on Wednesday, I started to come around and make some improvement.
John wakes up from a medically induced coma to find his room filled with detectives looking for answers.
John tries really hard to try to piece together what occurred that evening, but the truth is that he has a very hard time. He's got some big holes in his memory from the trauma.
And it's not just the result of shock.
The gunshot wound that entered John Sutton's head detached his retinas.
I had a multiplicity of injuries. When the pain medication wore out, everything hurt, and I was blind. I don't remember being shot in the head at all.
The details about that night come slowly and in fragments.
We slept in separate rooms as a result of my snoring. At about 10 o'clock, maybe a little bit before 10, Susan went into the bedroom. I went to the bathroom. While I was going to the bathroom, I heard a big bang. I had no idea what it was, but if it had been something serious, I expected that Susan would have called out or said, "Help me," or something happened. I went to the bed. I sat on the bed. In comes a man with a black hat, black shirt, black pants, and the firing started. It felt as though I had taken a dive and landed right on my face. And I was confused, didn't know what was going on.
Despite his best efforts, John gives police almost nothing to go on.
It was safe to say that he did not know the person who shot him. He really had no description of the person at all.
And having drifted in and out of consciousness for days, it's only now that detectives are able to tell John the fate of his wife.
The reaction was, I basically lost all emotional ability to recognize what had happened, what was happening, and what would happen. I just was out of it. I still feel guilty that I didn't go to the funeral.
John's loss is compounded by the mystery of who killed his wife and why.
From an investigative point of view, you have to consider who was their intended target. Was it that they were after John and Susan was just collateral damage? Was it someone who was angry with Susan and John happened to be home at the time?
A clue from the crime scene offers a potential motive.
The responding officer advised that there was a point of entry of a sliding glass door opposite of where the victims were shot.
We considered the possibility that what occurred was actually a robbery, home invasion gone wrong.
But other details don't support this idea.
Susan had jewelry everywhere, expensive jewelry. There was cash and credit cards in plain sight, where someone who had the motive of money would have easily been able to grab it and take it with them when they fled, but that didn't happen. Whoever came in went across the entire house, literally from one end of the residence to the exact opposite end, as far as you could go, shot both people, and then turned around and fled.
For the detectives, there's only one other option left.
There was a lot of bullet trauma to Susan Sutton, which meant that a lot of anger was directed towards her.
It was an execution. They were targeted. They were going to kill John and Susan Sutton.
Their only hope of finding Susan's killer now rests with the timeline.
We started to focus in on that 24 hours of who they may have been in contact with.
They learn of a celebration dinner John says had taken place just hours beforehand.
Susan cooked for her own birthday party and some southwestern salad, as I recall.
The people that were there was her husband, John Sutton, her son, Christopher Sutton, Christopher Sutton's girlfriend, Juliet Driscoll, and Teddy Monoto.
Teddy Monoto was John Sutton's partner in the law firm. He was also a good close friend of the family. We also learned that Juliet Driscoll was a secretary that worked for John.
John and Teddy specialized in civil litigation, and some recent success was also being toasted that night.
They had won a big case, and they were celebrating having gotten that money.
Teddy tells police that having arrived at the house at 7 o'clock, he then left at around 9:30. This makes him the last person to see the Suttons before the attack. Strangely, he's also the first person to show up at the crime scene.
I was the one that told him officially that Susan had died, that she had been declared dead on the scene. And he became very emotional about that. He was very visibly shaken by that news. That seemed a bit above and beyond what most normal people would have reacted. He wasn't blood relative. He was a friend of the family, lived in another house.
As Detective Cordero Stutz probes further, her curiosity turns into suspicion.
Teddy tells me that he is a competitive shooter and that he had been earlier that Sunday shooting, and therefore he would have gunshot residue on his hands were we to test him. When we're in the midst of a homicide investigation, somebody, clearly identifying themselves as, I'm gonna have gunshot residue, is something that a bit of a red flag.
The unsolicited information puts the spotlight firmly on John Sutton's business partner.
It's visible that he is in conflict. I felt that there was something he wanted to tell me, but he just didn't know how or was afraid to.
But is he a killer? There's still a big question mark.
Teddy Montoto's admission of handling a gun only hours before the shooting of John and Susan Sutton has detectives questioning whether he was responsible for the attack.
There are many reasons why Teddy could have been a very plausible suspect in this shooting. He has the ability to gain the entire, very successful business from the death of his partner.
In some murder cases, money becomes the motive for the murder. How it plays out in the sense of who promised money, who paid money, all of that is semantics to me. Money is a great motivator. Money makes people kill.
Detective Cordero Stutz presses Teddy further, but his answers only deepen the mystery.
He told me that he had been on the phone with Susan, and he heard what he described as a loud bang and maybe even a gunshot, and that then the phone went dead. But then he kept calling back and wasn't able to get a hold of anyone. And eventually he decided that the best course was to actually drive back to the house to make sure they were okay. And when he gets there, the police are on the scene and have it taped off, and he's unable to actually go up to the house.
Detectives hone in on why Teddy is on the phone with the wife of his business partner so late at night.
It just didn't add up. He just left a party, and if they were going to have conversations pertaining to business and all stuff, you'd think it would have happened during that time frame. We've got to find out now why he was this important to Susan Sutton to be having a conversation at that time of the night.
Teddy was strongly affected by what had happened to Susan. He's extremely nervous, and I had a very strong feeling that he wasn't being forthcoming. Investigations are a percentage of fact-finding, but it's also a percentage of your own personal experience and what other people call their gut feeling. All of these bits and pieces that kind of rub you the wrong way, they're not enough, obviously, in regards to making an arrest or anything like that, but it's definitely something that makes you dig deeper. So I discussed it with the lead investigator, and we talked about the possibilities of asking him to submit to a lie detector test.
Polygraph examinations are extremely helpful. In certain circumstances, it is to send messages to the person, number one, that you're having interviewed. You don't believe them. We don't know what the person is lying about, but we know they're lying.
Teddy agrees to the test and then fails.
Specifically, he fails in regards to the relationship between himself and Susan.
Despite this, Teddy continues to protest his innocence, so Cordero Stutz turns her focus to the physical evidence.
When Teddy Monoto responds to the police station to take his polygraph, he admits to us that he's now brought his weapon with him. It was a 9mm, which was consistent with the casings on the scene. And we impounded it and tested it to see if, in fact, this was the murder weapon.
While the detectives await the ballistics result, they begin to question others they can place on the victim's 24-hour timeline.
In any investigation, you want to interview anybody who has knowledge about what happened just prior to the incident, if you can. So just reconstructing what happened that night altogether was very important.
Chris Sutton and his girlfriend Juliet Driscoll were also at the house that night.
I learned that they had been at the house for dinner around 7 p.m. and that Christopher and Juliet had left around 9 p.m. to go see a movie.
As the team looked to confirm the young couple's alibi, they also delved deeper into the Sutton family history.
We had learned that Christopher was born to a 15-year-old mother and was adopted at a young age.
Well, there were infertility issues, and therefore we went the adoption route. Well, she was thrilled. She couldn't have been more happy, as he was an infant and a toddler.
But Chris's behavior then takes a troubling turn.
As he matured into a teenager, became difficult to get along with. He was sort of bucking his system, having more and more problems getting along with his parents.
He was always getting into trouble. When he was 17 years old, Susan approached John and said, "Look, we need to do something with Chris."
They decided to send him to a strict behavioral reform school in Samoa.
We were at our wits' end, and we had lengthy conversations, and this seemed like this was a good way to go.
The idea was to help Chris find his way, but even here, he remained defiant.
Well, there was rumors of some very hard discipline.
One of the things that they said was occurring at the school is that there was like an isolation room where if you broke the rules, you were locked away in this isolation room for hours at a time.
And he thought he was going to get out when he turned 18 years old. But he didn't realize that John Sutton went to a court and had an order signed to keep him until he completed the school, which infuriated Christopher Sutton.
The disturbing details of his past are enough to make Chris a potential suspect.
Christopher has a history. He's been in trouble before. He's given his parents a hard time. But the night of the incident, he's not there.
According to Chris, they arrived at the theater at 9:30 p.m. They then sat down to watch the film at 10 o'clock, and it ended a few hours later.
Juliet confirms that she and Christopher had gone to the movies and that they had then afterwards gone home and gone to bed. Once we found out what movie theater they'd gone to in the time, we were able to get the CCTV footage of the two of them leaving the movies, which was sometime around midnight.
The couple's alibi is rock solid. So the detectives delve further into the Suttons' final day. This leads them to John's thriving legal business.
I got up early and went to the office at about 9:30, checked my mail, reviewed some cases.
Some of the closest friends that we spoke to said that John was the type of lawyer that would take on any case. He wouldn't shy away from a case where other lawyers would.
When I say that he won a case and it was a big payout, we're talking millions and millions of dollars.
In the time period, June, July, and August, we had resolved several substantial personal injury cases. The total gross of all of these settlements was nearly $4 million. And in fact, Thursday, which would have been August 19, before the incident, one of those checks came in for $1,350,000, and Susan asked Christopher to take it to the bank.
It was a business that could have easily created enemies. And in fact, it did.
One of the cases John settled was a $100,000 case, I believe, against a woman. She had made threats against John that she was going to come by and shoot up his law firm.
She had a tremendous grudge. I was the worst thing that there could have been. She filed complaints with the Florida bar against me. She wanted me dead. She hated me.
Police are now considering the possibility that a vengeful killer stalked and shot John Sutton and his wife over a lawsuit.
If someone is attacked and the first thing you do is run their name, and there's already been someone documented that they have been threatening to cause them harm, of course you're going to take that seriously.
As they probe deeper into the death threat, the detectives uncover a disturbing piece of information.
One of the things that we learned is that a neighbor said that they heard a boat crank up sometime around 10:30 and take off behind John Sutton's house at a high rate of speed.
The Sutton home backed up to a very large canal, and that particular witness said that around that time she had observed this boat speeding away.
And we learned later that she owned that type of boat.
So one of the things we had to do was to verify where the boat was at the time of the murder. One of the detectives was tasked with finding that information out, and they were able to obtain video footage of her boat docked at the time of the murder in her slip.
It just did not fit that this boat may have been used to gain access to the Sutton property.
But as an investigative lead, we have to do the interview and make sure, or either rule her out or keep her in the investigation. We spoke to her. We didn't have any belief that she did that.
With the woman cleared, detectives turn back to Teddy Monoto. The ballistics report on his gun has finally landed on Cordero Stutz's desk.
When the results came in, it turned out that it was not the murder weapon.
But Teddy's not off the hook yet.
We are able to rule out that that's the weapon that was used in the murder, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't have been another 9mm.
So she presses him on what he's hiding.
Once we confronted Teddy with the fact that he had failed the polygraph, he quickly admitted to us that the reason why he failed it was because he and Susan were involved in a romantic relationship and had been for several years.
The confession offers up a whole new motive for the attack.
After he admits that he's involved in a relationship, you have someone who has the oldest of all reasons for murder, which is a love triangle.
A love triangle in murders is often a very overwhelming consideration because someone may feel, for example, that they've been wronged by somebody, that they were promised something. I'll leave my wife, I'll leave my husband for you. And this person's been kept on the hook for, in some cases, years. Police have to look at that because someone being jilted can be a very strong factor for murder.
Teddy says that the reason why he lied originally was because he wanted to protect Susan's honor. At this point, she is now dead. Nothing's gonna change that. And if he could have kept from her family, her children, and her husband that she was having an extramarital affair, then that was something he was gonna try to do. Teddy claimed that he was at home at the time of the shooting, that he was on the telephone with Susan. Using the phone records, we were able at that time to verify that he was in fact speaking to her from his residence, which was a couple of miles away from the scene of the crime. Teddy's ultimately ruled out as a suspect.
But the admission devastates his friend and colleague.
I felt that I had been betrayed. I felt that I had been tricked. I felt that I had been deceived left and right. And it was just one more problem on top of the stack of problems.
The suspect list is now down to 0, frustrating John beyond measure.
I was quite a difficult victim because I kept asking, where are the police reports? I want the police reports. What's going on? Who's doing what? What's the investigation? And they were not forthcoming.
So it has to be a totality when it comes to a homicide investigation. It's not just finding the person who committed the crime. It's saying, this person may have done it for A, B, C, and D reasons, but they didn't. It is a lot of work, but you absolutely have to be thorough.
Weeks into the investigation, that diligence pays off when the detectives notice something unusual.
I was assigned a task of collecting the phone numbers from the Suttons, John and Susan, Chris Sutton, Julia Driscoll, Teddy Monoto.
What stands out are the records belonging to Christopher Sutton.
It turned out there had been a pattern of phone calls for several weeks, up to leading to the night of the shooting.
162 times from July 19th through August 23rd.
The last of those calls comes close to midnight on the night of the murder, and it's a moment captured on camera.
He probably wasn't more than 50 to 100 feet outside the doors when he immediately gets on the phone.
What caught my attention when I observed the video is the fact that Chris, upon leaving the movie theater, is quickly reaching for his cell phone and dialing it and getting on the phone. And Juliet is actually a couple of feet away from him and kind of, lagging behind him. You would kind of think that after a movie like that with your fiance, you might be holding her hand and asking her what she thought of the movie, as opposed to getting on the phone and calling someone else.
We learned who he spoke to at that particular time was a guy by the name of Garrett Kopp.
He was young, somewhere between 19 and 20. We learned that he had a girlfriend who he had a child with. He had a past for breaking and entering, a misdemeanor past for dealing in drugs. He appeared to be going nowhere in life.
Kopp seems like a petty criminal, until they discover a detail about his most recent run-in with police.
We learned that he had been arrested by Homestead Police Department the day after the murder.
Homestead is probably 18 to 20 miles south of the city of Coral Gables.
And at that point, Art and I were, wow.
As an investigator, I don't believe in coincidences. Certainly in homicide investigations, there's no such thing as coincidence. There's a reason why things happen.
So I called down to the Homestead Police Department. I asked him, I said, please tell me it was some type of assault. He says it was. I said, please tell me a gun was involved. He says, well, there was a gun involved. I said, please tell me it's a Glock. He says, it was a Glock, 9mm. I said, now please tell me you have that weapon. He goes, I do.
Detective Larry Bellieu's gut tells him he may have located the murder weapon that killed Susan Sutton.
At that point, we retrieved that weapon from Homestead, and that weapon was submitted to our firearms examiner, who matched that weapon with the projectile evidence removed from Susan and from the crime scene, and learned that it was the gun used to kill Susan Sutton and shoot John Sutton.
Garrett Kopp now becomes bigger than life in our investigation, and now we've got to start figuring out what's going on with Garrett Kopp.
Despite this game-changing discovery, Bellieu is in no hurry to drag Kopp in for questioning.
We do know that we have the weapon. We have Garrett Kopp, who supposedly had the weapon, but we still wanted to build the case. If we brought Garrett Kopp in, he says, look, I got that weapon from a friend of mine. That's all he has to say, basically. We still don't know that he did it. So during this time, we're still building our investigation by talking with other people.
And the first person on their list is Christopher Sutton.
I was instructed to do just a routine interview. While talking to Chris about Garrett Kopp, he only identified him as a business associate. When asked, what do you mean by business associate, he said he had Garrett Kopp to his parents' house to do some oddball jobs. He didn't elaborate on what those oddball jobs were, except for one particular item, which was after the murder of the mother and the shooting of the father, that he had Garrett Kopp over to remove the carpet from the master bedroom where John Sutton was shot.
But when Kopp's name is floated to others, a very different picture emerges.
My assignment at that time was John. I'm able to interview John after he returns home from the hospital while he's recuperating. John said that Garrett and Christopher were very good friends, that they spent a lot of time together, they hung out together.
Garrett had been in the house before, yes. Probably a few times. I was aware that Garrett had dropped out of school. I was aware that Christopher hung out with him. I believed that Garrett wasn't working and was somewhat of a deadbeat, and this wasn't something that was a good relationship that Christopher was having. I was suspicious of Christopher doing drugs. However, I had nothing to prove it.
As police dig deeper, John's suspicions are confirmed.
We had learned that the two of them were talking about dealing in drugs, and in fact, Chris would give Garrett Kopp drugs to sell so he'd have some money in his pocket.
This introduces a whole new theory about the crime.
Garrett had been to the house. He had worked some odd jobs, so he knew the layout of the house. So as an investigator, ultimately, you have to consider what gain or benefit Garrett had. If it was Garrett who decided that, you know what, I know they've got stuff there to get money, or I know there's drugs there, I'm gonna go get the drugs. We have to consider the possibility that maybe Garrett Kopp did this all on his own.
He had a warrant for his arrest issued by the court for something else. And when he was arrested, I said, well, bring him to my office. And that's when we started interviewing him about the murder.
For the record, state your name. It's Garrett Kopp.
Well, during this whole interview, I'm gaining information that I'm going to be able to attack Garrett on.
Interviewing is an art, it's not a science. Again, it's experience. But when you interview someone, you're looking for a number of tells, if you think of poker for a minute, tells in a poker game. A really good interview can pick it off while he's conducting the interview.
Garrett tells me that the gun that they retrieved that night was not his weapon, that it was somebody else's, which I kind of thought he was going to tell me anyway.
Sometimes when people are starting to cover up, they all start telling little white lies, which, you know, in the end, the more little white lies you tell, eventually you're going to get tripped up.
Well, one of the things I asked Garrett was how close he was with Christopher.
How long have you known Chris Sutton?
About 6, 7 years.
How did you meet Christopher Sutton?
I lived in his neighborhood,
Where was that at?
Sunset Club,
And where's that located?
Sunset and 72nd Avenue.
And I said, do you speak with him on a daily basis? He says, no, not at all. Which we knew to be a lie because we had the phone records. He said he was with his girlfriend that particular night. His girlfriend was out waiting in the lobby. And I said, well, I'm going to be speaking with her right after I get done with you. He knew that he'd been put in a corner, and now he's been caught in several lies. And at that point, finally, 3 or 4 or 5 hours later, he gave it up and said, look, he did do this. And I said, well, why? Why did you do this? Was John Sutton or Susan Sutton ever angry at you? Did they ever mistreat you? Did they ever do anything to hurt you? And he said, no. And that's when he revealed it. He said, Chris wanted me to do it, and he told me that if he wasn't gonna do it, Christopher was gonna kill him and his baby boy.
After a grueling interview, Garrett Kopp finally admits to pulling the trigger on both John and Susan Sutton.
Why did you shoot Christopher's parents?
Because my life was in Chris's hands. Told me he'd kill my son if I did not. And me.
But Kopp's revelation implicating the couple's son, Christopher, as the man behind the attack adds a completely different dimension to the case.
So I know that Garrett Kopp is going to go to jail for first-degree murder. At that point, we have to start trying to build the case against Christopher.
Without alerting Chris, they must find another way of confirming Kopp's story.
And it had to be Juliet Driscoll, his girlfriend. They were close. They'd been dating for several years. She has to know about this. So we brought her in, and I interviewed her all day. We had to be there 10, 11 hours. And she kept denying. I don't know anything about the murder. Christopher never speaks to me about anything. So I had to find some kind of way to get to her. And I said, you know what? She was close to Susan. And I brought that fact up. I said, Susan was good to you. She was like a mother to you. I can't believe you're just allowing this to happen. That family, the whole family was good to you. They gave you a job. And I saw a tear come out of her eye. And I knew that I had her. And at that point, she began to tell me what she knew about Christopher. Chris hated his parents for sending him to the behavioral school and really wanted to do harm to them.
Juliet admits that when he would get very angry, he would make statements like that he wanted to kill them, that they deserved to die.
But we still didn't know why, because this was several years prior. What triggered this now? But then we realized Teddy and John had just settled those multi-million-dollar lawsuits, and Christopher knew about it, and Christopher actually put the money in the bank. He wanted the money. It came down to the hatred, and he just wanted their money. So now I had enough to get an arrest warrant for Christopher Sutton.
After tracking Chris down, he is brought in to face Detective Bellew.
I introduced myself to him. I said, two things are gonna happen today. I'm gonna go home tonight, and you're gonna go to jail for murder. There's not anything stopping that. I said, before you tell me anything though, understand this. I said, I've done my homework. I said, I got a sworn statement from Juliet Driscoll, and he said he wanted to see it. Well, he read certain parts of the statement and put his head down on the table and says, and started crying.
Christopher Sutton is charged with the first-degree murder of his mother and the attempted murder of his father.
Do I feel betrayed, tricked? Absolutely. Does my head hurt now because I got bullets in it? Absolutely. It was cold-blooded murder. There are some things that are temporary and come and go. This is permanent. This doesn't go away.
The 24-hour timeline developed by the detectives reveals exactly how Chris masterminded the plot to kill his own parents.
The story is that Christopher gets a gun, gives it to Garrett, tells him how to get into the house, told him where his parents would be, the fact that his parents would be in 2 separate bedrooms, and exactly where to go to the back of the house and where to do the shooting. The night of the shooting, the family gets together for a celebratory dinner around 7 p.m. at the house. Chris and Juliet are there. Susan and John are there. Teddy Monoto is there as well. They have a nice dinner. They cut a cake for her birthday. Around 9 p.m., Juliet and Christopher leave for this movie. Teddy Monoto leaves the house around 9:30 p.m. And around 10 p.m., both John and Susan retire to their respective bedrooms for the evening. Now, we know that Teddy gets on the telephone with Susan shortly thereafter. They're actually on the phone. He's on his landline, and she's on his cell phone. During that time, we have Garrett Cobb enter the house in the rear sliding glass door, walks from one end of the house all the way around to the other end, and confronts each of them in the bedroom, and he shoots them. He shoots Susan multiple times as she pulls a blanket over her. He shoots John multiple times, striking him up to twice in the face. He leaves John for dead, and he has in fact killed Susan right there on the scene. Shortly thereafter, Christopher and Garrett are on the telephone with each other for Garrett to report to Chris that he has in fact carried out the murder. The timeline it's very important. I think that any reasonable person can look at that timeline and understand how it went from point A to point Z.
We had done our homework. We had turned over every stone and was able to present all these facts beyond a reasonable doubt to this jury on why Chris Sutton was involved in his parents' murder.
In exchange for his testimony, Garrett Kopp receives a sentence of 30 years. Christopher Sutton never admits to his involvement. He is sentenced to life.
There's no doubt in my mind that Christopher orchestrated this for his own means. He saw that he had a great chance for a free ride and to do whatever he wanted whenever he wanted to do it. I have not spoken to him since the trial. He needs to be secured and not ever considered for parole. At this point, I have to look forward, not backward. And therefore, I compartmentalize it. I put it in the background. I know it's there. I bring it up too often. Of course, you always question, what else could I have done? What else could I have done? There's nothing else I could have done.
Christopher Sutton had been looking for someone to kill his parents for years, and he found that someone in Garrett Kopp.
Somebody very deliberately murdered him. It was an execution, no mercy.
A brutal killing.
He had 5 knife wounds, with the final being in the jugular.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
There was a $15 million life insurance policy. That's motive.
He was a fraudster, a high-level con man.
Everywhere you looked in that family, there was a criminal on every branch, really. Well, who done it? $42 million and all these people that wanted him dead. That's a whodunit.
The truth will be revealed.
This is a case of a century, really. Case of a lifetime for a detective.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Greenwich, Connecticut. One of the most affluent towns in North America.
It's just the definition of luxury. If you don't have multi-millions of dollars, you would have no chance to ever live there. It's just filled with sprawling mansions, filled with very wealthy people, from CEOs to celebrities.
But no amount of money is guaranteed to keep you safe.
Andrew Kissel was discovered by the moving crew. They had been moving him throughout the course of the weekend, then came back first thing on Monday morning.
They went to the door, knock, 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 nobody is answering the door. So they tried the door and it was unlocked. One of the movers goes down to the basement to pick up an item. Next to the item is Andrew's body. He is shocked. He goes upstairs, he tells the other guys. They called their boss, and their boss said, call 911.
You heard it come over the radio, and I said, hey, Pierre, run that address. And he runs the address.
And I just remember him giving me a look like this was going to be a very interesting case.
Andrew Kissel was very successful in real estate. He was living a very lavish lifestyle. He rented a huge backcountry mansion in Greenwich. He was going out on yachts. There were parties. Beautiful life, beautiful house, wife, children, success, money.
He enjoyed the high life. He enjoyed being the big guy on the block, showing everybody a good time.
Greenwich PD homicide detectives Terry McHugh, Pasquale Iorfino, and Pierangelo Corticelli arrive at the scene.
It was a bloody scene.
He had 5 knife wounds, with the final being in the jugular.
You imagine sticking a knife in somebody, that's a terrible thing to do. Monsters do this stuff.
He was also found bound and gagged.
No mercy. Now, you know he was yelling. Had to be, right?
They actually cleaned off the knife on his pants, wiped the blade clean and took it with them. That's professional. That's a pretty good hitman.
Your experience tells you that, number one, it wasn't a random crime. It was an execution, very personal. There's no question about that.
To solve his murder, detectives need to uncover every significant detail of Andrew Kissel's last 24 hours, starting with his time of death.
You can tell by the position of the body and the way the blood is, and you can get an idea about how long it had been like that. And with the assistance of the medical examiner, they're able to pinpoint it to a degree. We know Sunday is the day Andrew Kissel was killed. He was probably killed in the evening.
They begin to build a picture of what happened.
There was no break-ins to the home. It wasn't forcibly entered. He obviously let the murderer in the house. First 3 questions out of my head was, why was he home alone? How long was he home alone? And who knew he was home alone?
We have to interview all of the people that are closest to Andrew and ask the basic information of the timeline of where they were leading up to the events of Andrew being found.
There's all kinds of fancy words for it, victimology, but bottom line is you have to learn who your victim was. Not only are you establishing the deceased timeline, but you're establishing the timeline of anyone that could be connected to this type of a murder.
Detectives track down Andrew's next of kin.
Haley Kissel was Andrew's wife. Very smart, educated woman, making a lot of money on her own.
She was told by the detective lieutenant that there was a body in the basement, and she immediately said, "It's probably Andrew." She showed no emotion. Most people show a lot of emotion, and most people want to see the body. She didn't want to know.
She wasn't grieving, she wasn't sobbing. There was no tears flowing down that face. You'd never know that somebody died in her family, especially her husband, that's for sure. She claimed she saw him on Saturday. She was assisting the movers. She left on Saturday. He was home alone on Sunday, and he was found dead first thing in the morning on Monday. It's just too coincidental that everybody left, and the only guy that stayed was murdered. You know, we had an issue with that. We couldn't figure out why Haley was in such a rush to get out of there with the kids. She told us that they were actually splitting up, so she was gonna find a new location to reside in with the kids.
Haley reveals their separation wasn't the only reason for the movers.
Andrew and Haley hadn't paid the rent. They had $10,000 a month mansion they were living in beautiful backcountry Greenwich, and they were going to be evicted.
And that's why the movers were there. He was running out of money, and he was miserable. And it was just not a good situation.
She told us that he was using cocaine, that he drank, that he was abusive.
She knew of all of his antics. She caught him with prostitutes all the time. She was embarrassed over and over and over, I'm sure.
She was furious. Their life was falling apart. She was extremely, extremely angry.
Haley makes a series of admissions.
On Saturday, Haley and Andrew had a visibly loud argument, heated over money. And they argued right in front of the movers and everybody that was on site.
She also volunteered that there was a $15 million life insurance policy on Andrew. So that's motive. Hello? That's a big thing. So we said, well, tell us about that. She's, well, I wouldn't get it. Well, who would get it? It's in trust for the children, if you will. 2 hours into the interview, she gets a call on her cell phone from her lawyer. And he said, you can't talk to my client anymore.
Then all contact with her basically stopped. Now, of course, it puzzled us that she was the widow of a guy that was dead, but she had to go to an attorney to see if she could answer a question. Of course, that piques our interest. So we contacted the insurance company.
I found the insurance policy and the application that he had made. And in it, I read the kids were contingency beneficiaries, meaning on her demise. No, Haley was the beneficiary.
That's what we call a red flag in our business.
Andrew Kissel's wife, Haley, has landed squarely in detective sights as a person of interest in his murder.
She obviously had some tough times with Andrew, and any woman would. He was having a grand old life at her expense, really.
For the investigators, the case bears eerie parallels to another death in Andrew's family.
To make it even more bizarre, his brother had been killed a few years earlier. One day, he came home. His wife gave him a strawberry milkshake laced with sedatives, knocked him unconscious, basically, and she bludgeoned him to death, and then had his body rolled up in a carpet and put it in a storage unit.
That was a big story. And then you come with Andrew's story, right? Now you got two brothers in the same family being murdered. I think the world wanted to know if Haley was directly involved.
The truth lies with Haley's timeline.
Haley Kissel was with friends down the road, actually. The family confirmed that she was there all day. She had a solid alibi on the day of Andrew's death.
We were able to trace every place she was, and she didn't leave. You know, she was not present at that murder.
The focus shifts away from Haley and onto her dead husband's finances.
Andrew Kissel had been investigated by the FBI for a large mortgage fraud scheme.
We found out he had this real estate development company, which took legitimate properties, millions of dollars each, just to buy the property.
He would take out a multi-million-dollar mortgage, and he would submit fraudulent paperwork saying that had been paid back, when in fact it hadn't.
He now goes back to the bank, and he borrows another $3 or $4 million on the same property. He did it 9 times.
This was one of several schemes the investigation uncovered.
There was a number of properties over in New Jersey, and he had gathered a number of investors, including members of his family, to invest money in this buying of this number of buildings. He sold them, but he didn't tell anybody, and he kept the money.
He was supposed to be paying dividends to the investors, but was actually taking money from them. I remember Pat describing Andrew as a mini Madoff.
It was $42 million in money pilfered along the way. He was great at thievery.
But eventually, somebody discovered the forged documents, his crimes unraveled, and he had been caught by the FBI.
He was charged with a number of federal crimes. April 6th, he was supposed to go to federal court and be sentenced. He was facing 8 to 10 years.
If there's a number of suspects because that person has defrauded a large amount of people, definitely it opens up the suspect pool considerably. And police have to start eliminating one by one.
Well, who done it? $42 million and all these people that wanted him dead. That's a whodunit.
We obtained the whole victim list from the FBI, and it was quite a long list.
Anybody we thought lost money, could have lost money, Andrew had a negative relationship with, anything of that nature, you name it, we interviewed him.
Of the big dollar individuals that lost the greatest amount of money were all mortgage companies and insurance companies, which are all insured.
And the other people, most of them we found out were rather elderly, well-to-do people. They're not gonna kill him.
Haley's parents were on that victim list as well.
You're talking about sweet people, nice people. Just because they had money and they were ripped off, they're gonna come after you in civil court, but they don't pick up knives and go after the guy that stole their money.
The investigation does yield an important fact, shared by all of Andrew's victims.
Even with all the millions of dollars that he stole off of these people, we found out that really nobody knew he was home alone. So now, it really limited the search for suspects to somebody in a closer circle.
They focus in on individuals familiar with Andrew's whereabouts around the time of the murder.
We came across the name Carlos Trilo, who was his right-hand man, so to speak. For lack of a better term, he was a jack of all trades for Andrew, both in Andrew's personal life as well as in his business life.
Carlos became close to Andrew in that he drove him, he drove the children, he ran errands, he took care of things. He was like a man Friday, if you will.
In fact, Carlos was one of the only people that Andrew Kissel had left by his side. He was almost like a friend at that point because he had nobody left.
Brought in for questioning, Carlos admits to having seen Andrew mere hours before he was killed.
Carlos told us in an interview he'd had a pre-arrangement with Andrew to pick up 3 items of furniture from the house. And he was going to come down on the Sunday and pick it up. So he goes down there and he says he was there for about a half hour where he saw Andrew. He said he chatted with him a little bit. He said Andrew looked okay. He was drinking Scotch whiskey, which was his drink of choice. And he said that he had a good attitude. You know, he's concerned about going to jail down the road, but he was okay, he said. He said he then left and he went back to Bridgeport.
Carlos told us that he had left at 6 p.m. that evening. And then, of course, we have the movers coming in first thing in the morning.
So we determined he'd been the last person, as far as we knew, to have seen Andrew alive. Very important to us.
Locating and being able to interview the last person to see the deceased alive is frankly critical in every case, because at that point you can establish things like what was going on with the deceased. Were they scared? Did they say anything to the person they're speaking with? Had they learned something?
He kept on saying, I love Andrew, I love him. And not in a romantic way, but in his friend way. He tried to maybe over-convince us that how much he admired and loved Andrew. But he kept on saying, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go, right? So, you know, we had to let him go. We looked at each other after that, we said, you know, he loves this guy, he's his buddy. What would you be doing if it was me? You know, you want to help out as much as you can. He gave us this song and dance. Why?
We kept digging, and we came to find out that Andrew treated Carlos just like a gopher. There was a report of Andrew calling Carlos on his day off, saying, I need you to come down here right away. So he leaves his family and drives all the way 30, 40 minutes down to Greenwich. And the only thing that Andrew wanted was for him to go out and get him some fast food. So it was that kind of disregard for Carlos, which didn't really fit well with Carlos's description of having a great relationship with Andrew and him being like a father figure.
Very strange, so a lot of things just weren't adding up with him. It didn't make any sense. That's a problem.
Carlos Trujillo's quick exit from his interview with detectives leaves them with more questions than answers.
So a week later, we had him in for a second interview.
And in this one, he gives us this tremendously detailed story. He said he went back to Bridgeport, but not right away. He left after seeing Andrew at 6 o'clock. He leaves and he goes down to Queens.
He said how he went to a bar, hung out with a lot of people, and danced the night away.
He says, oh, the place was mobbed. And what else did you do there? I had a couple of beers and I left.
Carlos Trujillo told investigators that he drove home in the late hours of Sunday morning, around 1 a.m.
He said he stopped at a restaurant, then brought home food for his girlfriend.
So that gave him an alibi, not placing him at the crime scene at the time of Andrew's death.
His house and his vehicle were searched, and we didn't find anything that was pertinent. His behavior going to Queens and coming back, it's not something that raised very big red flags from our point of view.
Because of the direction he took, detectives have a way to check Trujillo's story.
The Easy Pass is a system where there's a monitor in your car that you pay for. And what it does, it lets you go through the fast toll lane without stopping to give the toll person any money. What it does, and it registers your car as it goes through, and sometimes takes a picture, depending on the toll booth.
We were able to subpoena those records. So we were able to verify that he was, in fact, going over the Bronx-Whitestone Bridge, as he indicated. However, there was no corresponding return trip on the Easy Pass.
So we questioned him about where he was. And he said, well, he couldn't find his Easy Pass. It was somewhere in the car, and that he had to go over a cash lane. We wanted to make sure that we understood the time frame on his whereabouts from leaving that house to Queens, back to Bridgeport. I mean, we wanted to make sure we were thorough. This is a case of a century, really. Case of a lifetime for a detective.
Determining the truth requires one of the team to sift through hours of CCTV footage.
Oh, Lord, Pierre was a rookie. Hey, that's what rookies do, all the grunt work, right?
At the time, it was still old-fashioned VHS videotape. It wasn't digital video. So I had a milk crate full of videotapes from the MTA police in their little viewing room.
He must have had some serious vision problems looking at those cameras nonstop.
As Detective Corticelli continues his search, the team discovers another potential suspect, Eric Boxerman.
So he was Andrew's friend, but he was also the man who worked with Andrew in the building business.
He's a real estate financier. He is on the social circuit in town. If you open up Greenwich magazine, you'll see him at, all of the events throughout town.
When questioned, Boxerman is forthcoming about the events of that day.
He cooperated, didn't hire an attorney.
At 11 a.m. on Sunday morning, he came to the house and observed that Andrew Kissel was drunk at the house by himself. He told investigators Andrew Kissel was laying on a couch and basically incapacitated, which tells you the state of mind of Andrew Kissel.
He is asked to explain his whereabouts during the window in which Andrew was killed.
He said he was home that night, which is right around the corner.
We asked him, did he see anybody? Did he talk to anybody? He said he saw a lady walking a dog, and that was it. So, okay.
So that was a question mark in our minds.
Anybody who has contact with the deceased the day the person died is going to be a suspect, because you are immediately a person who has the opportunity to kill him.
Unable to verify Boxerman's alibi, detectives dig into his relationship with the Kissels.
We came to find out that his relationship with Haley was more than just a friendship.
While Andrew was slipping out the front door, here's this guy slipping in the back door.
If you're a person who saw the deceased just before he died, and you're having an affair with the deceased's wife, you're going to be the #1 suspect. It's a volatile situation. If there's a love triangle, you just don't know how you're going to react. And you might react by crying, but you might react by committing a murder.
As more light is shed on their illicit romance, a bizarre rumor surfaces.
It hits the news that Andrew killed himself because he wanted to be a great guy and give his kids this $15 million in life insurance.
The media speculated at the time that it was potentially a suicide for hire. Who would choose to kill themselves in such a slow and painful manner? To be stabbed by a knife multiple times, in your basement, bound up. There are other ways to do it.
From a victimology point of view, everything that we knew about Andrew was all about Andrew. He was a classic narcissist. That whole idea was just crazy to us. What was interesting was News 12 was the first, I believe, to float this story based on an unconfirmed source to their tip line. Pat and Terry were able to track down the telephone number from this unconfirmed source.
The number is a cell phone tied to Eric Boxerman.
So was he floating that idea as a way to shield or protect Haley based on his relationship with her? Were there other motives? We didn't know.
So now we got very interested in him.
A Newsline tip has put Eric Boxerman in the frame for Andrew Kissel's murder.
It was just very, very odd that his cell phone would be connected to this story of Andrew, arranging his own homicide.
Detectives weigh what Boxerman had to benefit against what he had to lose.
He was a millionaire. He owned a $13 million home. Not a shack, a $13 million home. He was a successful businessman. But he's having an affair with Andrew's wife. So, yeah, it piqued our interest. But just because somebody's having a relationship with somebody doesn't mean they're a murderer either.
The crime scene also bears none of the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
This was pretty much a professional hit. He didn't have any hits in his past.
Nothing ever put him at the scene, so we couldn't go anyplace with that.
Nothing else came back to him as that type of person that would actually kill somebody. But he put a spin on the case, and, it puzzled us.
With Boxerman's involvement looking unlikely, they reach an impasse.
We worked hard on it, we talked to all those people, and it ended up, I couldn't go anyplace. Just couldn't go.
Well, the case goes stale. Terry had retired.
My time came up. I talked about it with Pat. I said, I'm ready to go. And he says, all right, I'll finish this thing off. And so Pierre was pretty much involved in it. He got my badge, which was nice, because it kind of carries it on,
By that point, we had executed probably over 25 or 30 search warrants.
You can't be sitting in the office waiting for luck to come to you. We tried everything. We went everywhere. We never saw our families, and we were always on the move. At one point, we joked that if we put our other halves in photo arrays, we probably wouldn't be able to pick them out, because we hadn't seen them in so long that we'd spend more time with each other than anybody else. Bashing our heads together, trying to, come to a successful conclusion, trying to figure this out.
There was an enormous amount of media pressure on the police to solve this case. I know Andrew Kissel's father, frustrated with the progress on the investigation in the first few months, wrote an email to the detectives and called them the Keystone Cops, which I think really, insulted them because they were working tirelessly on this case.
So Pat had that email blown up and pinned on his bulletin board, I remember. And that was one of those things that was driving him to show the father that we had not given up and we were still going to go at this as best we could and solve the case.
After countless hours viewing CCTV footage, Detective Corticelli makes a breakthrough.
He called me and said, I got him. I'm like, are you kidding me? And then he showed me the picture. It was like unbelievable, clear as could be, Carlos Trilo coming through the cash line.
That system down there took one of the best pictures you'd ever want to take. It was amazing. God, he looked terrific.
So Carlos comes back across the bridge toward Connecticut. It was much sooner than he had initially admitted. Right before the time in question when Andrew was killed,
Detectives now have proof that Carlos lied about his alibi.
for that reason, we looked over everything again with fresh eyes. I remember sitting in the FBI's White Plains office with Pat and going into their evidence room where they had the evidence from Andrew's case. I believe it was 25 or 26 banker boxes full of documents that we went through with a fine-tooth comb.
It didn't seem like Carlos Trujillo really had any reason why he would want to see Andrew Kissel dead. But investigators began to realize that Carlos was not just his driver, but was involved in some of Andrew Kissel's business deals, money changing hands, part of this mortgage fraud scheme.
And then you had his own brother, George Trujillo, that had power of attorney on many of the properties that were illegally sold. He was right involved with that. You had Carlos's girlfriend, Stella Tafur. Stella Tafur was Andrew Kissel's accountant for all the frauds. So she was directly tied in the whole case. It was like the entire Trujillo family tree, and it was a criminal on every branch, really.
Carlos's motive slowly comes into focus.
Andrew was going to be pleading guilty, and then he was going to be fully sentenced. But he could have implicated other people. And based on that, the people that would be most likely to be in peril would be Carlos, his family members, and the people that were directly involved with Andrew's business.
It's damning evidence, but detectives need direct proof of a murder plot. They scour the materials gathered from Carlos's home.
We found credit cards with different people's names in it, and one happened to be Amita Trujillo. And so I say, hey, who's Amita Trujillo? Let's find out who it is.
They track down her address in Waterbury, Connecticut, 57 miles from Andrew's home.
I say, Pierre, let's go. We have to go to Waterbury. We're headed to see this Amita Trujillo. I wanted to go poke at the hornet's nest, because that's what we do. Waterbury is a tough neighborhood, and it's the opposite of Greenwich. It's a bunch of blue-collar workers struggling to make things work and just trying to work hard for their money. We get around the back of the house. We start banging on the back door. I hear somebody yelling from the second floor, hello, hello. I said, hey, how you doing? It's the police. We need to talk to you. So she comes out, and we start talking to her. And we showed her a picture of Carlos. So she says, yeah, that's one of my cousins. Yeah, I know him. And I said, here to talk about a homicide. And she says, you mean they killed that rich Jew guy?
Detectives interviewing a cousin of Carlos Trujillo have unearthed more than they expected to find.
And he said, oh boy, here we go. I said, well, tell us some more. She goes, well, my half-brother, Lenny, was at a 4th of July party last year, and this guy, Carlos, the guy in the picture, came up to him and offered him money to kill his boss. She said that Carlos said that he'd stole $500,000 from the boss, and he wanted it back, so they needed to get him killed. And then she heard another story that he was ill and wanted to die. All kinds of different stories. But in the end, it was Carlos killing his boss.
It's an astonishing tale. Detectives zero in on Lenny Trujillo.
Now we gotta fill in the rest of the blanks. Just because you know something, you gotta be able to prove it. Lenny, believe it or not, is a naive, simpleton, lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, just recently had a kid. We really need Lenny to tell us everything that happened, that transpired between him and Carlos. So we push him.
So Lenny Trujillo said that basically Carlos approached him and said that this guy that he worked for, this rich guy in Greenwich, wanted to die. And he basically was going to hire him to help do it for some cash and a computer.
He was surprisingly cooperative. He said that his whole intention was to play Carlos for his money. He was going to take whatever money he could from Carlos, and that would be that.
Lenny admits he and Carlos worked long and hard planning the crime.
This was 6 months, 8 months in the works. They would meet at parking lots, on rest stops, on highways, and Carlos would give them more money. They continued to plan it and plan it and plan it. He told us that Carlos put him up in a hotel. We were able to go there and find records that Carlos paid for a room there on a credit card and that Lenny stayed there, and we had both their signatures on receipts. The next morning, they drove down to Greenwich. And he described Greenwich, he described certain stores in Greenwich.
This was detailed information that a kid from Worcester, Massachusetts could not have come up with on his own. It's pointing directly to the conspiracy between Lenny and Carlos to commit this murder. And he said the plan was to tie the victim up, bring them down to the basement, and stab them. So by virtue of that, we were able to know immediately that he was telling us, you know, at least in those parts of his story, the truth. Lenny admitted to 90% and wouldn't go to that extra 10% of actually having committed the murder or being there when Andrew was killed.
Despite lacking a full confession, it's enough to finally complete the picture of what happened in the hours leading to Andrew Kissel's murder.
Well, the timeline is so essential to everything that took place on the last day. On his one day off on a Sunday, unbeknownst to Andrew, Carlos decides he's gonna drive all the way down to Greenwich just to say hello. He just wants to see how Andrew's doing.
When he left Andrew, he went down I-95 as he's going into New York, turns his cell phone off, according to his cell phone records. He uses an easy pass to go across the Bronx-Whitestone Bridge, but then within less than 2 hours, takes the cash lanes to cross back into the Bronx from Queens. So Carlos comes back with Lenny to Greenwich, Connecticut. He now is let into the house by Andrew because Andrew knows him.
They might be having a drink together. They definitely did some coke. Then, one way or the other, they took him downstairs to the basement.
They gagged him, and they tied him just like Lenny told us he was gonna do. They put him down on the ground. They made it nice and quiet.
I imagine that they held him with one hand and took a knife and 5 times plunged it to the hilt, 3 of which were kill shots. 2 in the aorta, 1 in the carotid.
After committing the murder, we believe they left the home. Carlos could have driven Lenny back home and then went back home to Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Confident in their case, Detectives Iorfino and Corticelli track Carlos down.
We found him a couple towns up driving a limo, and we stopped the car. I came walking up with Pierre. Hey, remember me? It's time. You're under arrest for homicide.
When they finally arrested Carlos and Lenny, they used my handcuffs that I was issued in 1965 and still had. They put my handcuffs on both of those mutts. And they put them on a plaque and they gave them to me. I got it at home. It's fabulous.
On April 15, 2011, Lenny Trujillo is sentenced to 20 years in prison. Carlos Trujillo pleads down, and after serving a sentence of 6 years, he is deported to Colombia.
Carlos only had 6 years, and I felt a little slighted by that. But when I realized that he was getting deported, as an immigrant myself, I love the mainland and my homeland, but I never want to go back to live there. I like it right here. So he could never come back here. He got a life sentence. His brother George went back to Colombia. Stella Tafur was Andrew Kissel's accountant. She disappeared. Who knows what happened to Stella? Money was everything to Andrew Kissel. That's how he got himself in this predicament to start with. He stole $42 million, owed a lot of people money, but did he deserve to get stabbed to death like he did? No.
In the end, if you do a good police job, it all comes out. And we did a good, thorough job, and we put our hearts into it, and it came out.
The house was not ransacked. It was not forcibly entered. The doors were locked.
A brutal killing.
It was apparent right then and there that we were dealing with something different.
A housewife, a former medical professional. She was involved in her local community.
A very devoted mother of a little boy.
Who had the motive to kill this lady?
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
You have 4 and 5 different pieces of DNA, all from different people?
The person that claimed that they were a soldier of God, soldier of death.
It was just bizarre.
The truth will be revealed.
I would not know how to classify it other than an assassination.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. The sleepy town of Williamsport, Pennsylvania, nestled in a lush valley, surrounded by forest.
Williamsport has a long history, tradition. You go back to the lumber barons, and of course, Little League Baseball started here. It's just a nice place to grow up, and you usually don't fear for your safety.
But one January morning, a grim discovery shatters that serenity.
We received a call from 911 indicating that a woman had been found in her residence. A friend, Dwayne Van Fleet, had gone to try to locate her. He found that the residence was locked. There was no answer at any of the doors. He looked through a window and observed the victim on the kitchen floor. The victim's name was Miriam Ellis. It was obvious that she was deceased.
She's killed based on a gunshot to her back in the area of her heart.
It's up to state troopers William Holmes and Scott Henry to find her killer. The first step, is questioning the man who made the 911 call.
One of the things you do first off the bat is try to find out about as much about the victim and their life as you can.
Mr. Van Fleet was one that was able to provide a fair amount of information to us.
Miriam Ellis was a housewife, a former medical professional. She was involved in her local community, and part of the reason they found her that day was she didn't show up to teach Sunday school.
She was an extremely good person, very devoted mother of a little boy.
She had a certain amount of stature, and a lot of people knew her.
One of the things that I recall with talking to him was she had no enemies. She had no enemies. Everyone got along with her.
Who would have a motive to do this to a middle-aged Sunday school teacher in Pennsylvania?
Investigators need to unlock every detail of Miriam's last 24 hours. But there's one key problem.
In any murder investigation, it becomes important to try to establish the time of death. A lot of times that's established with eyewitnesses. Somebody sees the crime occur. However, in this case, there were no eyewitnesses.
They look to Miriam herself for an approximate time of death.
The body can tell many tales. How long it's been there, rigor mortis, lividity, aid in determining, at least initially, how long this person's been deceased. And these are things that we are trained to look at.
There was some blood on her body. It appeared that she had laid there for a while. In canvassing the area, we couldn't find anybody that had seen her after 5 o'clock Friday evening, the 15th.
Without more information, investigators can only determine a wide window for the murder, placing it sometime late Friday night. They turn to the crime scene, looking for clues about the killer.
The house was not disheveled, it was not ransacked, it was not forcibly entered. The doors were locked. All the exterior doors were locked to the residence, the garage. There was a handset for a telephone within close proximity to her hand.
As detectives subpoena her phone records, they face an uphill battle. A much-loved mother, killed within her locked house. Then, a keen eye spots a critical clue.
We noticed a bullet hole in the window at that time.
It was a double-pane exterior window. It was located directly above the kitchen sink.
It was apparent that the shot had come from the outside.
Our theory at that point was that, she was standing up against the kitchen sink, talking on the telephone when the round was fired that struck and killed her.
For a gunshot to be fired outside of a residence through a window, striking somebody, killing them, was something that I had not seen before.
This was in a residential neighborhood. There was no hunting season that was in effect. This was clearly not a hunting accident.
I would not know how to classify it as other than an assassination.
Somebody deliberately chose to set up, lie in wait, and assassinate Miriam Ellis, sniper style, through her kitchen window.
It was shocking because this woman was murdered in her own home, and it doesn't happen that way.
That single shot is now the only lead.
When the investigators then traced trajectory of the shot back, it took them back to a stream bed in behind Miriam Ellis's house.
And then, as we looked a little further, our forensics team was able to find footprints.
They came from a Reebok full tilt basketball shoe, and that was the tread pattern. Size 14, they were positioned in a way where someone took up a shooting position alongside a tree that was directly back from Miriam's kitchen window.
The investigators also found a cigarette butt in the area where the shot had been taken.
As they looked further, they were able to find what turned out to be a homemade silencer.
Very rare, at least in my career, did you find a silencer. It was apparent right then and there that we were dealing with something different.
This establishes how Miriam Illes was shot, but the mystery of who did it and why remains.
For an execution-style killing, you have to have it planned. You have to have it planned in advance. Either the person wanting someone dead has to retain someone to do the crime, or they have to do it themselves and try to cover up their tracks.
Somebody has taken great steps, great pains to plan out and execute this murder. It was not like Miriam was involved in some type of criminal enterprise, or that she was doing some kind of risky behavior where she was putting herself in harm's way. She was at home on a Friday night.
Was she concerned or afraid for her life? What was going on in the last 24 hours? Was she hiding? Did she say anything to anybody? Who saw her come home? These are all factors that become critical to helping you investigate the case.
Some of those questions may soon be answered.
As the investigators were processing the scene, Dr. Richard Illes showed up.
Dr. Richard Illes was a heart surgeon here in the Williamsport Hospital. He was well known, and a lot of people called him a lifesaver.
When a woman's murdered in her home, you must look at the husband first. They're the closest to the deceased. They're the ones that ought to be able to give you the most information.
It's difficult to talk with grieving family members about this, but by the same token, they want to know, and they want to help, and therefore they'll do anything they can.
Dr. Illes tells investigators he last saw Miriam when he stopped by the house 2 days earlier, on Friday at 5 p.m.
He was going to visit his family, which was down in the Chester County area of Pennsylvania.
Detectives then learn the couple had recently separated after being married for 8 years.
Miriam Illes had moved out of the family residence. Primary custody of their son, Richie Illes, 5-year-old, was with Miriam Illes, and her husband had visitation time with Richie every other weekend. The fact that they were going through this divorce established a potential motive.
You have to look at, how was their relationship? Were they happy? Were they unhappy? Were there any public instances of, fights? That type of thing. You have to look at all of those variables.
Was it an argument that went bad? Well, not in this case. Not when you have a sniper fire.
Beyond the facts, a seasoned detective would be looking for tells. Everyone has them. Everyone has some sort of give, if you will. Detectives are trained to recognize all of that.
As they probe further, the doctor's behavior seems off.
One of the first things he said, after being told that Miriam was dead, he asked what evidence was found, which the investigators thought was odd.
It seemed kind of a strange question for somebody to ask at that point.
He then makes an interesting admission.
He told us he was no stranger to firearms. He had a hunting background and that he had owned some firearms, which a lot of people in this area do. That's not a big deal. But we wanted to take a look and see what he had and if it related to, the crime scene at all.
We were able to determine that bullet that killed her was a .22, which gave us information on what type of weapon to look for.
And in fact, they did obtain and take from Dr. Illes numerous .22 caliber class rifles.
This puts Miriam's former partner front and center.
Love can very easily turn into hate, and that hate can grow and grow and grow until you can't think about anything else other than that person who you hate being dead.
Dr. Richard Illes has become the first suspect in his wife's murder. While his guns are sent for testing, investigators scrutinize his life.
He did, of course, as a cardiothoracic surgeon, make a very good living financially. He was paying quite a sum of money in child support per month. I believe the total was somewhere in the area of $12,000.
That was the largest support order that had ever been entered in Lycoming County history.
Killing somebody for money is not uncommon. In fact, it's the opposite. You're either killing somebody for money or you're killing somebody for love. Those are the two main reasons anybody ends up dead.
With an age-old motive for murder, investigators press the doctor for details on where he was when Miriam was shot.
Dr. Illes was supposed to pick Richie up for the weekend visitation on Friday evening.
Dr. Illes decided to spend the weekend with his sister, 2.5 hours away in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. He can substantiate the start of his journey through a witness, Nancy Mitch.
It was a friend of Miriam's that had stopped by to visit, to speak for a few minutes, chit-chatting.
Nancy Mitch was able to explain to investigators that she was with Miriam to be present during the exchange when Miriam transferred their son Richie to Dr. Richard Illes for the weekend.
Dr. Illes was supposed to pick Richie up on Friday evening at 4 o'clock. We had learned from Nancy that he was a little late getting there. He picked up his son at Miriam's residence approximately 5 o'clock, so we knew he left the residence with his son. Nancy had left and Miriam seemed to be okay.
So we could last verify that Miriam was alive around 6 p.m. on Friday, January 15th.
Dr. Illes says he then made a quick pit stop before heading to his sister's.
They'd gone home to his house first.
He had left for southeastern Pennsylvania approximately 9:30 in the evening with his son.
He said they drove to Lewisburg and stopped at a fast food restaurant.
He had indicated that that stop was sometime around 10 p.m. The weather was bad that evening, and he called his sister around 11:24 p.m. and indicated that he was going to stop, and him and Richie were going to spend the night in the Harrisburg area.
Nancy has confirmed one piece of Dr. Illes' alibi. Detectives must now determine if the rest of his information is accurate.
They could verify the cell phone call to his sister on the phone records. And we know that Dr. Illes had checked in at 12:57 a.m. at a hotel in the Harrisburg area. That gives him a clear check-in time, a receipt for when he's there, so he has corroboration for his whereabouts.
Dr. Illes' story seems to hold up, but investigators also check him against the physical evidence.
The center of the silencer had holes that were drilled through it. That was used to affix the silencer to the murder weapon. None of his guns had such a thing. There was nothing that could establish the murder weapon, that it was Dr. Illes' gun. In addition, there was some DNA that was found on hairs inside the silencer. And there was DNA found in a cigarette butt. Ultimately, the DNA that was tested did not match Dr. Richard Illes.
According to the evidence, Dr. Illes was nowhere near the house at the time of the murder. But as they press for more information, he makes another admission.
Dr. Illes was having an affair.
He had developed a romantic relationship with a coworker who he worked with at the Williamsport Hospital. And that may have led in part to the separation.
It seemed like very similar circumstances to how he met Miriam. He started working with her. They developed this relationship and got married. And then it was kind of the same way with Katie. She actually took Miriam's job and then ended up a relationship.
It's one of the oldest crimes in the books, so to speak, is love triangle murders. Perhaps as many as 15 or 20% of the ones I investigated involved a love triangle of some kind.
the other woman, Katie Suarez, potentially would have a motive to kill Miriam. She could have wanted Dr. Illes all for herself and to get Miriam out of the picture, to eliminate the chance that Dr. Illes would go back with his wife.
Jealousy is an amazing thing because jealousy often leads to obsession, and obsession is what drives people to commit horrific acts.
But there's more at stake than just their relationship.
Between a potential divorce and the alimony, there was a lot of money involved there. It's a big financial issue. If Miriam left the picture all of a sudden, she would reap the benefits of anything that he would gain.
Detectives must determine where Richard's new girlfriend was when Miriam was killed.
Katie Suarez was somebody that he would have spent a lot of his free time with and that would be around him, but if he was going to travel out of town to visit his family, that would give her the opportunity to commit the crime.
They quickly track Katie down.
We learned that she was definitely out of town visiting relatives in another state at the time that Miriam was murdered. No way she could have done it, not possible. As we continue with the investigation, we can't find anybody else that has any motive to have this lady killed.
Then, the assassin reaches out to them.
There were these letters sent to the police station.
The first anonymous letter, right off the bat, claimed that the writer was responsible for killing Miriam Illes.
I had been involved in, oh gosh, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal prosecutions. I'd never had a case with an anonymous letter. I mean, you see it on TV, but it's not something that really happens.
In a sensational twist, a self-professed killer writes a letter to police.
There was a lot of thoughts that go through your mind. You're thinking, is this somebody that's just making this up? Somebody that just saw the case in the news and was sending these letters out and they had nothing to do with it?
The person that claimed that they were a soldier of God, soldier of equality, soldier of death, they claimed that the victim was racist and they wanted to harvest the racist people in this town.
I remember it being very explicit about Miriam being wicked. And I believe there's certainly some racist comments that were included in the letter itself.
It didn't make any sense. There was nothing that we had that supported that accusation at all. It was just bizarre. It was very strange.
While the murderer seems to be reaching out, they've also gone to great lengths to obscure their identity.
The letters were tested for fingerprints. There weren't any.
They were handwritten in block printing in pencil.
This was in such a way that you wouldn't be able to tell how that person typically writes. So you couldn't make a comparison later at trial if you wanted to.
As investigators puzzle over the letter and its contents, another one arrives.
The second one, it had a different tone. It was indicative that the writer had a superior intellect and we didn't. It smacked of arrogance.
This second letter also points investigators towards a new suspect.
The author described himself as having advanced degrees, having many advanced degrees.
It indicated to us that possibly an associate of Dr. Illes's may be the person that did it or the person that wrote the letter.
He's talking about Dr. Zama. He was very good friends with Mrs. Illes. He and Dr. Illes were partners.
But again, Dr. Illes was the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. That may have created some friction between the two of them.
They were the two cardiothoracic surgeons for the Williamsport Hospital.
The writer claimed that they were a superior intellect, that they spoke 5 different languages or several different languages, which Dr. Zama did.
Dr. Zama happened to be African American. In fact, he was probably one of the, few African American people that were in the Illis's kind of inner circle of friends. He happened to be a tall guy that probably had pretty large feet, potentially size 14. He was certainly somebody that the investigators had to look at now as a result of the letters.
Dr. Zama is brought in for questioning.
The investigators actually showed the letters to Dr. Zama. They asked, who's this describing? And he indicated that it looked like the letters were describing him.
But he is adamant he played no part in Miriam's death and never wrote the letters.
Dr. Zama got along with Miriam, and they were friends.
She was the wife of a colleague, and that was as far as their relationship went.
He also claimed to have been with friends during the window of time in which Miriam was murdered.
The investigators checked out Dr. Zama's alibi for the evening of the 15th. They confirmed that he had an airtight alibi. The anonymous letters were also processed for DNA.
There was a black hair in the glued flap of the envelope that was sticking out like a sore thumb.
The DNA was tested and it didn't match Dr. Zama, but it didn't match any other of the samples of DNA collected in the case either.
The investigators now believe they're being played.
Whoever did these letters was taking all these steps to conceal their identity. They were taking the steps to make sure that they weren't using saliva to lick the glue flap or to lick the stamp. But here, this large hair was predominantly placed right there in the glue flap for someone to find. It was really when that happened that I personally really started to think that there was a lot of planting of evidence going on here. The silencer with additional DNA, a cigarette butt with DNA. When it didn't match each other, it became apparent it was being planted. Now you have 4 and 5 different pieces of DNA, all from different people? Were there 5 people involved in this crime? No.
Many steps were taken to execute this plan. At the end of the day, you have to think either that he's just a psychopath or that he was really enjoying the whole process and didn't want it to stop.
The problem for troopers Holmes and Henry is that this realization puts them no closer to catching Miriam's killer.
I think we entered a time that we were, kind of felt that we were spinning our wheels. We were frustrated because of some of the things that had been occurring.
You want to do the right job, you want to do it correctly, you get one shot at it, and you don't want to mess up. If you do, then that's the one shot you get.
Then, when a subpoena they'd been waiting for since day one is approved, it unlocks a key piece of the puzzle.
There was a handset for a telephone within close proximity to our hand.
The investigators got the phone records for Miriam.
We came to find out that there was a friend that she had been speaking to on the telephone Friday evening that had actually called her.
She indicated that she heard the sound of glass breaking during the phone call, and she heard Miriam say, "Oh my God," and then didn't hear anything else. At that time, she hung up the phone. She called back, and she got a busy signal. And then she just assumed that they had gotten cut off, and now Miriam was talking to somebody else on the phone.
This new information gives investigators something they'd been missing: an exact time of death.
The conversation ended at 10:37 p.m.
So we could tell that call had ended the moment we believe Miriam was shot.
The time of death was everything.
Armed with the time of death of exactly 10:37 p.m., detectives recheck the alibis of all persons of interest. The only one that doesn't add up belongs to Dr. Illes.
Initially, he said that he had been in the Williamsport area, and he was already south on Route 15 by 10 p.m.
They said they stopped to get a bite at a restaurant.
If in fact he was there at around 10 o'clock, he could not have committed the crime. On the surface, it looked like it checked out, but they really couldn't verify that he was actually there at that 10 p.m. time frame.
That made his alibi look a little shaky at that point.
A well-planned or perfectly planned murder, you generally solve through the small details within the case. Small detail will include, to a great degree, timing. The timeline becomes critical in most cases, if not all cases.
Investigators break down every detail of Dr. Illes' story.
They traveled south on Route 15, and he made a call to his sister at 11:24.
He had called to tell her that they were going to have to stop and stay at a hotel.
The only real hard time they could verify was the cell phone call to his sister.
They use this information to determine the closest point Dr. Illes could have been from Miriam's house when he made the call.
We knew the route he had taken that evening because he had told us. We knew he was in a certain radius from the cell phone tower that his call came from, that his call bounced off of that cell phone tower.
Once we contacted the cell phone company and got the coverage maps,
we were able to determine approximately where that phone call was made in relation to the crime scene and in relation to the hotel.
And we found that he could have been much farther north on Route 15 than he had indicated.
The question investigators now have to answer is whether Dr. Illes could have taken the shot at 10:37, made the call to his sister at 11:24, and still made it to the hotel for 1 a.m.
We wanted to drive the route under those same conditions. We checked that night, were there any accidents that would have delayed traffic? Of course, the weather was bad. Was there a road closure? We actually even wore some sneakers that were somewhat similar to the ones that were worn that night. Went from the scene on foot, followed that dry stream bed to a vehicle, and drove to the location within the area he could have made a call from that night on his cell phone, and we found out that it was possible to do that.
Just the fact that they could recreate the timeline, and it worked. It blew everyone away.
All the dots have to be connected. You have to go with what may seem to detectives initially to be something relatively trivial can become extremely important as the investigation unfolds.
Dr. Richard Illes is now the only suspect without an alibi. Next, investigators need to find a way to tie him to the murder itself.
Two young men were looking for minnows in one of our local creeks, and while doing this, they come upon a modified rifle.
They thought it looked strange, or for whatever reason, they picked it up, called the police. It's a cut-off barrel. It's a cut-off stock. It's got a scope on it. It's not something you might find every day.
The bolt from the gun had been removed and discarded. Any of the markings on the gun had been drilled out of them to hide the serial numbers. But there was a clip in the gun, so they could actually see that the caliber of that gun was a .22. This was consistent with the bullet that had murdered Miriam.
Most intriguing of all, however, is where it was found.
The partial rifle was located within close proximity to the route that Dr. Illes told us he traveled the night at the homicide.
Using the silencer recovered from the scene, they have a way to determine if this rare gun is the murder weapon.
On the top of the barrel, there was a screw that had been screwed in and added to it that would had to have been done to the gun to accept the silencer. So when you took the components of the silencer and you slid them over the barrel of the gun and turned it, it fit.
There was a stir in the crime room. You knew that this was the weapon we had been looking for.
Now the question becomes tying that gun to the perpetrator.
I was tasked with running down the particulars of the weapon. That was a Savage Model 23 rifle. Trooper Holmes made a trip down to speak to Dr. Illis's family.
He learns that Dr. Illis had inherited his father's guns, and his Aunt Jean is the only person left who knows about them.
She had brought out a photo album and was leafing through it, showing the investigators some old photos. One of the photos she flipped to was a black and white photo of her brother posing with a rifle in one hand and a dead groundhog in the other.
When he brought that photograph back, we were able to determine that that was a Savage Model 23D.
The more coincidences that pile up, the less chance that it actually is a coincidence. You can plan your murder out down to the T, but you can never rule out the fact that a fisherman walking in the Pennsylvania woods is going to step on a gun that was willed to you by your father.
We had the connection.
Investigators have recovered the weapon they believe Richard Illis used to kill his estranged wife, Miriam. The challenge now will be to secure a conviction, despite the maze of conflicting forensic evidence.
It was very frustrating for the case, because even though by this time we had our belief that, Dr. Illis may be involved, as a prosecutor, I know this is going to be an extremely difficult case to win in front of a jury because I've got multiple pieces of DNA that don't match the accused.
You can only convict if the only logical inference that can be drawn is the person's guilt. And so if there's an alternate suspect who doesn't have an alibi, that's your reasonable doubt.
So we went back to the area where the gun was found, and we started looking and got lucky again. We found a set of shoes up there, athletic shoes.
They were determined to be the same size as the footprints from the scene. They were determined to be the same tread pattern, so they were the same shoe that was used to make the imprints.
You knew when you saw those. Those were the shoes that had taken the killer in and taken the killer out.
They must now prove the shoes were worn by Richard Illis.
We still had the issue that they're a size 14 and he wears a size 10. And of course, it would have been very possible for somebody with a size 10 shoe to wear a 14.
They are sent to the lab for forensic testing.
They found a hair on one of the tongues of one of the sneakers. They did DNA testing on that, and that came back to not match Dr. Illis.
But if the investigators are right, Dr. Illis wasn't the only person at the scene that night.
We believe that somehow he drugged his son, Richie, and he was asleep in the car.
Obviously, the son didn't have those shoes on, but transfer theory is if you leave a room or enter it, you're picking up evidence or you're leaving evidence, be it hair or fibers, anything to that effect. So there would explanation of how that hair could have got there.
We tested that against Richie Illis, Dr. Illis' son, and we got a mitochondrial match to that. The link came down to a hair from a 5-year-old.
Richard Ellis planned to use false DNA to throw the police off his track. But in the end, his son's DNA links him to the murder.
You have a theory. You start with a theory in a homicide investigation or any criminal case. We had our theory in this case. And this evidence, the picture, this evidence from the sneaker, this evidence from the bullet in the magazine of the rifle, all of these things corresponded with our thoughts, our theory. They supported it. And it's physical evidence. That's powerful stuff. It doesn't lie.
As Illes is arrested for the murder of his estranged wife, investigators are left with the chilling knowledge of how he killed her.
Dr. Illes had prepared some time in advance to commit this murder. He would have had to have done that because the gun had to be modified, the silencer had to be created and fabricated, all which would have taken a substantial amount of time. He knew that if he was going to kill Miriam, he didn't want his son to be present to find her body, so it had to be on a weekend that Dr. Illes had custody of his son. This was the weekend when all those stars aligned and gave him the opportunity to commit the crime.
The plan became reality on Friday at 5 p.m. when he picked up his son from Miriam. A few hours later, the doctor returned.
Dr. Ellis parked the car with Richie asleep or drugged, went through the stream bed, got up to a point where he was in position behind Miriam Ellis's kitchen window, and he would have had to have waited there until Miriam would have came into the kitchen and stood in a position that gave him a shot there. If she was anywhere else in the house, he couldn't shoot her. He could only shoot her when she was in that kitchen in front of that window. And at 10:37 p.m., she was in there, was on the phone, and she presented the shot to him, and that's when he killed her. He placed the evidence there in the scene, the cigarette butt, arranged that in a position to be found, and then he would have left the scene, leaving those size 14 tracks. Then he would have gone back to the car with his son and traveled south.
He drove to the first remote place that he could get rid of evidence. He threw out the gun, he threw out the shoes, he returned to the road and continued traveling.
He made a call to his sister at 11:24. Presumably, he's doing this knowing that the records will show up and that, that can assist him in his alibi. But what it actually showed is that he could have committed the offense.
When you took this and you put it in a timeline perspective, that was key.
Richard Illes is charged with first-degree murder.
When Dr. Illes was arrested, they found an unfinished manuscript of a book. And the title of the book was Heart Shot, Murder of the Doctor's Wife. And the author was Dr. Richard Illes. And it goes through and it basically documents the murder of Miriam Illes from the perspective of the killer. And the thing that I remember the most, and I'll never forget really, is that the book describes the killer's emotion at the time. And it described the killer as having an orgasmic catharsis at the time of the murder.
Despite the evidence, Illes pleads innocent to the charge. But the jury sees things differently.
After a trial in 2004, Dr. Illes was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
This is just the bad luck if you're him, or the good luck if you're the police. But without that firearm, he would not have been convicted of that crime.
Dr. Illes was an intelligent man who thought he was probably smarter than he was.
He didn't want his wife to have all his money, and he thought he could get away with it.
I don't know what it was that caused this case to get under our skin, other than that it was something that could happen to any of us. It was the life any of us could have been leading.
We had a little boy here, very tragic. He was just a little guy who no longer had his mother, and ultimately he lost his father in this.
To do that to your son, to carry out this murder, is just beyond belief.
I heard this woman screaming, "She's dead."
A brutal killing.
This woman was controlled. She was bound, tied up for a reason.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
He's one of these guys that thinks he's smarter than everybody else.
And he said, "If you tell anybody, I'll kill you."
The truth will be revealed.
He thought that he could get away with this.
This poor woman probably begged for her life. It just sends chills all over me.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Nestled between the Indian River and the Atlantic Ocean lies the peninsula of Merritt Island, Florida.
We do have a lot of tourists that come through. It's known for water sports. The whole county is pretty much surrounded by water. A lot of boats, fishing.
So this is a very laid-back county. We're tucked away over here on the coast, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place to live.
But one hot July afternoon, the waterways reveal a grim secret.
The judge that lived on this piece of property, and he was doing yard work. He saw what he thought was a manatee. So he walked to the shoreline. And that's when he saw that it was a woman. He called the sheriff's office, and then I got the phone call.
Brevard County Sheriff's agents Jerry Harrell and Allie Roberts arrive at the scene.
We see a nude body of a female. As a homicide agent, that's not a good day.
The body's in a moderate stage of decomposition, the bloating. It hadn't purged yet, so it was probably twice the size it would normally be. She was tied with rope and some type of duct tape, and it had plastic bags tied to the body.
To catch the killer, investigators will need to unravel the last 24 hours of the victim's life.
The significance of those last movements of your victim are often critical to what happened.
Their first challenge is the woman's identity.
We knew that we had a nude white female, don't know who it is. When you have a name, at least you can do some victimology. You need to start looking at that person. What can you find out about that person? What does that person do for a living? What people are surrounded by that person? We have a fingerprint expert, one of our crime scene techs, and she fingerprints the body.
She is identified as 22-year-old Misty Morse of Indian Harbor Beach.
We find out that she lives a short distance away from there. She lives with her mother. And she grew up here. She's a local girl. Encouraging to me because usually the killer is someone that you know. That gives me a way to go, rather than being an out-of-stater or out-of-towner who was just driven here.
They looked to determine how long Misty's body had been in the water.
It can make it more difficult to determine time of death. You have to take into consideration the temperature of the water and control for that. The water may accelerate the internal changes in the body and cause more decomposition at an advanced rate than it would outside the water in cooler conditions.
This is July in Florida. It's hot, the water's warm.
The heat, the insects, the animals, sometimes it's kind of hard to gauge exactly how long a person's been deceased when they're exposed to the different elements.
I'm thinking this body had been in there for several days.
As they start to develop Misty's timeline, a theory forms.
I'm thinking at that point, someone either drove in the dark of night and threw her out of a car, into the river, or she was dumped off of a boat. Looking at the body, it has some bags, like grocery store bags, tied to it. So whoever put her there weighted her down, and she was probably on the bottom for a period of time until those rocks or weights that were used busted through the bags, and then she popped up.
The physical evidence presents disturbing insight into their victims' last moments.
There was also a black rubber cord binding. It was window spline. It's tied around her. She was bound with a piece of nylon rope. It was red and white in color.
There's tape wrapped around the head. She was controlled, she was bound, tied up for a reason. This poor woman probably begged for her life.
They must now decide how much of this harrowing detail to impart to her next of kin.
There's no way of telling somebody in a good way that their loved one is deceased or been murdered. So the best way to do it I've found over the years is to come out and tell them.
Her mother opened the door and looked at us, and it was obvious that we were detectives. And her mother said, "It's her, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it's her." Her mother had seen the news coverage and told me that, Misty didn't come home, and she just feared that it was Misty. She had been expecting us. She didn't know what to do. It just sends chills all over me. Being a parent and having children Misty's age at that time, you think of your children as children. I felt so bad for her.
Misty's mother contacts her ex-husband, Bob Morse, now living on the west coast of Florida.
I answered the phone, and then I heard her screaming, "She's dead. She's been murdered." And I said, "What? Who is this? What are you talking about?" She said, "Misty, she's dead." I almost fell down. I mean, literally, I almost fell down. I said, what happened? She goes, somebody killed her. They found her in the water. I said, oh. There wasn't anything I could do. It just made no sense at all. The big question is why? What would drive someone to do something like that?
Misty's family provide investigators the details of her life.
Misty's mom started describing Misty how she was named as a baby, Misty April Morse. She was born on a misty morning.
Misty was very much of a free spirit. She definitely marched to her own tune. At 22, you know, she was just at the stage where she could, you know, get out, go do whatever she wanted to do. I think that at that time, Misty was looking to discover herself and figure out who she was, what she wanted to do, where she wanted to be.
The focus shifts to the last time Misty was seen alive.
Misty's living in a little apartment with her mom. Her mother said that the Wednesday night before, Misty had come home from work around midnight. She said she could hear Misty on the phone talking to someone.
She talked for a few minutes, then a little bit later she received another telephone call.
Misty's mother says the first call came in at 2 a.m. and the second 20 minutes later.
She said Misty opened her door, popped in her room, spun around, asked her, how do I look? And Misty was very happy. Misty she said, was going out with someone that she was excited about, someone that she knew. Her mother did not know who that person was. After Misty left, she went back to sleep, got up, and went to work as usual.
Her mom tried to call her a couple times, see what was going on, when she was coming home, all that, and never got a hold of her. I had called her, but not getting a hold of her didn't surprise me. It was not unusual for Misty to take off with friends and go do whatever.
But when she didn't come home the next day, that's when she started worrying.
The details provided by the family, together with the condition of her body, help police determine a likely time of death and a lead on who was responsible.
My opinion, she was last seen early morning hours. Wednesday night going into Thursday morning, she's found on Sunday afternoon. I thought that she had been in the water soon after her mother last saw her.
In the manner in which she left the house, it's pretty obvious that she was leaving with somebody she knew. The person she left with, we were pretty confident it's the person that killed her.
Detectives believe Misty's unidentified caller may be responsible for her murder. They ask her mother for help in identifying who it could have been.
I assured her that we would be there for her and that I would follow this case through. She told me about everybody that she knew in Misty's life.
From the list she provides, one name stands out to her.
Teddy Underwood was I don't know if you'd call him a boyfriend. She had met Teddy through a girlfriend of hers. Teddy's a good-looking guy.
Mr. Underwood had dated Misty for a short period of time prior to her death.
Detectives check his background and make an important discovery.
Teddy had other arrests and burglary and some type of sexual assault or battery charge.
When police find a suspect who has some sort of record for sexual assault, it definitely puts a huge flag on that person. They would determine if that person would be a likely suspect to commit murder.
That shot him right to the top of the list.
They use his criminal record to help track him down.
Teddy was a fast talker. He was the guy I had to give a lot of attention to. You're interviewing them, you want to tie them down to a story. Okay, it's not an interrogation, it's a fact-finding mission. Just to get a timeline going. And that's very important. We put him on the hot seat. But Teddy responded, you know, he was as cool as a cucumber. And he told me, I said, hey man, I want to help you. But I know you're thinking it's probably me. He says, I understand that. I says, but it's not me. Teddy described it as a short affair. I mean, they may have hooked up a time or two. He moved on, she moved on. It was just one of those things that was short and sweet.
You're judging what they're telling you. Is it making sense? How are they acting? What's their demeanor? Are they trying to be evasive? Are they forthcoming?
Teddy says he had not seen Misty in over a week, and that he was with his friends in the early hours of Thursday morning.
Teddy had an alibi and no interest in the river or being on boats or anything like that. He was so honest and truthful. He had nothing to hide. I go by that gut feeling, and I just did not have it with Teddy.
As Teddy is cleared, they turn to Misty's autopsy for clues that may help to ID the killer.
There was no obvious bullet holes, no obvious stab wounds, but the body itself can give you clues. As an investigator, when you look at a body that's thrown in the water, that's been blindfolded and gagged, I think it's safe to assume that that person was probably alive when they went in the water. Why else would they be blindfolded and gagged? So if that's the case, drowning is a very high possibility.
There is this misperception in general that if water is found in the airway, in the lungs, and in the stomach, that means that an individual drowned. But in actuality, water can enter the body in those places passively after death. So it doesn't mean definitively that an individual died from drowning just because they have water in their lungs, they have water in their stomach.
The medical examiner just would not give us a cause of death. Now, the manner was clear. Homicide.
The examiner probes further, looking for details hidden from the naked eye.
When you're doing the autopsy, not only are you looking at the body itself, but you're looking at everything attached to the body.
There are things that may show up in microscopic examinations, and you don't know what it means until the investigation is advanced and you have more information.
When you're moving the tape from her head, there's a hair present.
It's a clue, but more work needs to be done for it to pay off.
DNA is a very helpful tool in investigating a death, but it's only helpful if you have something to compare it to.
The pathology work is now complete. Misty's father arrives and immediately provides police with a new name.
Misty was telling me about this new guy that she'd met. He was good looking and he had money and he was an ex-Navy SEAL.
She had a semi-long-term relationship with a guy by the name of Brent Huck. And he talked about how he didn't like Brent. Brent was a guy that bragged a lot, had money, and made everybody know it.
Brent Huck has this persona of being like a bad boy. And I think a lot of the girls and a lot of his friends are attracted to that type personality.
I know that Misty liked to take chances, like most 22-year-olds. I did when I was 22. I think most of us do. We all think that we're 10 feet tall and bulletproof and gonna live forever. I remember thinking that when she was younger, we wondered if she was gonna make it past 18, because she had seemed to have a real bent for getting into trouble, associating with not good people. But we felt like, you know, she was over that. She had been seeing Brent off and on. I said, look, you can do better than this. You don't need this guy. Get away from him, just stay away. He's bad news. Of course, as you know, every parent on the planet knows, the fastest way to get your kid to do something is tell them not to do it.
He says, you really need to talk to Brent Huck.
Detectives track him down at his parents' house, an upscale home on Merritt Island.
Brent didn't know we're coming. You know, we're hoping that, hey, this is gonna take us somewhere. Knocked on the door, we waited, hear a dog barking. Brent finally comes to the door.
We started talking to him about, you know, his relationship with Misty and you know, how it's been going. He tells us that he's known Misty for like 1.5 to 2 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. They've dated for a while. He said that she even moved in with him for a couple months.
As they talk, Agent Harrell spots something suspicious.
I noticed he had abrasions on his knuckles and hands, and I asked him, how'd that happen? And he says, my dog was pulling me with a leash, and I was on my skateboard, and the leash burned my hands. It's not a burn, it's an abrasion. That's a crazy story.
Detectives bring him down to the station for more questioning.
If you didn't have anything to do with this, this will prove to you that you didn't. He had no problem interviewing with us.
Brent reveals to police his relationship with Misty wasn't really over.
It wasn't really a friend, it was more of a benefit, not really a friendship. It was I could go over there. I knew if I talked to her enough, I could still go over there and have sex whenever I wanted to.
He kept her on the string, so to speak.
When was the last time you slept with her? I'd say the 11th. The 11th? Yeah. Do you want it? Yes. Was that at her house or your house? Her house.
This was 9 days before Misty disappeared. Brent then admits things had recently become more complicated.
He sent some friends of his, called him, he says, hey, we saw Misty and Misty's pregnant?
Brent called to confront her the same night she disappeared.
I asked her, I was like, look, you know, what the hell is going on? When I saw her on the 11th, I was like, you're not pregnant. You know, why do I keep hearing this? You really ruined my life.
Brent Huck's admission to phoning Misty the night she died has made him the latest suspect in her murder.
He told us, you know, that he called her and bitched her out and told her to stop saying those things because he had a girlfriend.
I bitched at her, and then we settled it out. I remember calling her back 5 minutes after I talked to her and just saying, you know, real quick, saying thanks and hanging up. So you bitched about the pregnancy?
And you're looking at what this person is telling you. How does that fit into what you know already?
For detectives, the timing of those calls now becomes critical.
Okay, when was the last time you actually talked to her? I want to say right around 3 a.m., 3 or 4.
This is over an hour after the calls that prompted Misty to leave home.
He puts his time frame in at 3:30 to 4 o'clock. That would have taken him out of that range.
Brent also claims he was nowhere near her house that night.
When you say you went home, you went, yeah, just parents' house or you? Oh, yeah, parents' house. At that point, I was fairly intoxicated as well. It was a rough night. That's how I described it.
He had been partying pretty hard that night by the time he talked to her on the phone. It's a whole group of people. They're drinking at a couple different bars. He goes to someone's house, they're still partying.
He called another young lady to give him a ride home.
Brent says that by 4 a.m., he was in bed asleep.
And we spoke to his friends who corroborated that.
He had been dropped off by the young girl. He was at his parents' house for the rest of the night.
Despite the potential motive, his alibi seems solid.
Homicide is a 24/7 job. It's very taxing. Because when you go home, you don't take the gun belt off and throw it down and forget. The cases you're working are forever in your mind. You wake up in the middle of the night thinking about something that you need to do or should have done or should have said or should have asked.
Believing the key still lies in identifying Misty's late-night caller, they continue to probe friends and family about her relationships. This brings them to a new name, Bobby Cooper.
I guess Bobby was expecting the law to show up, and we did. We interviewed him, and the guy was all crying. I mean, the guy was upset.
You can learn a lot based on their reactions. It's not necessarily just the words. It could be they start to cry. It could be they overdo the crying. You've conducted so many interviews at this stage that you're relying on your experience to tell you whether that's a real reaction to this scenario or not.
And he told me, he says, hey, I really love this girl. We had just met, and it was a whirlwind, a few days. He's very talkative, and he's answering my questions. He explained when he last saw Misty, they went to a movie, and he'd been calling her and calling her, and he says she didn't answer the phone. I thought maybe that was the end. Maybe that's just her way of ending the relationship. She just won't answer.
Bobby tells police he did finally get through, saying he spoke to Misty the night she disappeared.
I talked to her Tuesday night, and then I talked to her again on Wednesday.
You call her cell phone or what?
Yes. Yeah.
How many times Wednesday did you talk to her?
I talked to her once on Wednesday.
And that was?
7:30, between 7 and 7:30.
He told us he talked to her on the phone, and that's very important.
Bobby explains he tried her again on Thursday afternoon. When he got no response, he left several messages.
One of the things killers will do sometimes is leave messages on a victim's phone to create alibis for the murder.
We see this as an attempt by the killer to throw the police off the scent, or to throw the family off the scent of the trail, and throw the investigation in another direction.
At that moment, Bobby stuns Agent Harrell with an unsolicited admission.
Bobby said I had her driver license. That's one of the things we were looking for, we couldn't account for.
If you have the property of a dead person on you, you better have a good explanation for how you got it. Because if you don't, you're going down for that murder.
The possession of Misty Morse's driver's license puts Bobby Cooper in the spotlight for her murder.
I asked Bobby, how'd you get her license? And he says, I've had it since we went to the movie. She was wearing pants that didn't have pockets, and she just wanted me to hold on to it. He says something to the effect, well, that's one way we're guaranteed to see each other again.
I think in his mind, if he doesn't cooperate or he gives a hint that he's not cooperating, that we're going to look at him, as a suspect.
Bobby claims he was at home with his family during the time Misty was killed.
He accounted for his time, and his dad verified that. Bobby was not our guy. Time to move on.
As a homicide agent, you have to be very patient in what you're doing. We have multiple agents interview different people, and at the end of the day, we sit down, okay, what did your guy say? What did your person say? We just review all those and try to put the pieces together as they fall.
Everybody we had interviewed, they can explain where they were or explain their relationship. We just kept moving forward.
Then, police receive a key piece of evidence they've been badly waiting for.
Misty's phone records, when we got them, told us exactly how many seconds, minutes she spoke to certain phone numbers who'd been trying to call her. The phone records is a line-by-line item. It told the story. You can see Bobby Cooper trying to call her over and over again, which corroborated what he said. And what was really important on her phone record is incoming call from Brent Huck's number, twice, just like what he said.
Brent first told detectives the calls were around 4 a.m.
But it was more like 2 o'clock, 2:20 a.m.
It was Brent Huck right back in the time frame of when the mother said of Misty that received these phone calls.
It's easy to lie using the right information, but just maybe changing the time up.
When someone's caught in a lie by police, it definitely sets them up as being a potential suspect, because police will start questioning as to why they did this, why didn't they tell the truth in the first place, and what were the reasons behind them lying, period.
Brent had a rocky relationship with Misty. He's creating these lies, he's living a lie.
Digging into Huck's personal life, investigators discover what may be an even greater motive.
He's got this girl on Palm Beach County, his new girlfriend, who's supposedly well-connected and maybe wealthy or connected to a wealthy family.
Brent and his girlfriend were in the process of buying a house in South Florida, wedding plans. I mean, they were moving forward with their relationship. But Brent had that problem, and that was Misty back here, that he just wouldn't let go. Looking back, you're wondering if that was the catalyst for Misty saying she was pregnant to everybody, knowing that that's going to get back, hopefully, to the girlfriend.
Police decide to pay the woman a visit.
My understanding was she had no knowledge that Brent Huck was having any type of relationship with Misty. As far as she knew, she was the only female in his life at that point.
Concerned her boyfriend is involved in a homicide investigation, she agrees to cooperate.
One of the investigative techniques would be to flush someone out. To have someone call your suspect, who the suspect might be comfortable to speak to. It's just another form of getting them to speak, getting them to come out of the closet to say something.
She tells Brent that the police want to speak with her about Misty's murder.
Yeah, they're really serious about you.
I am.
Is there anything you want to tell me now before it comes out later?
There's no way about it. I'm not talking on my phone. Period.
Are you getting mad at me now?
I'm not gonna talk on the phone. If you want to get down to the bottom of this, come talk to me. God!
It's not serious.
Goodbye.
It's pretty obvious from the phone call. He's got some anger issues.
And I think he's being found out, you know, that he has this other thing on the side and all that. And of course, she wanted to know, and she wasn't happy about it. And that, I think, was a big part of understanding Brent Huck. That was my first I got you moment. I'm thinking, here we go, this is the guy.
With Brent Huck back in the spotlight, investigators revisit his main claim of innocence, his alibi.
He had told us before, he got home around 3:30 or so in the morning.
They track down Lauren, the young woman who took him home from the night's partying.
She just drove him home. She was going that way, it was no big deal.
But Lauren says she picked Huck up at 2 a.m., 2 hours earlier than the time he first claimed he was home asleep. Which means he could have driven to Misty's house soon after.
We actually asked Lauren, being the last person we know that had contact with him, did he have any injuries on his hands? No, no injuries. So it had to happen that night.
Based on this new information, investigators decide to pay Huck another visit.
Brent talked to a lawyer or two. Of course, they told him not to have any more contact. But we wrote a warrant to go back to the house to do more searching. They find a window spline in the garage. They find cell rope. They find under the sink these Publix bags.
A lot of people have spline in their house. A lot of people may have white tape at their house. A lot of people may have plastic bags at their house. What's the chances of having all three? They were able to determine that that spline came from the exact same machine as the bindings on her body, from the same factory, the same company. Same with the tape. They were able to identify the tape as the exact same tape that was found on her body, exact same company, same make, same physical characteristics, same coloring. A match. And being the last person who talked to her on the phone. So all these things are adding up. It's a lot of circumstantial, but it's all, you know, compounding against him.
But the most compelling evidence proves to be the hair found on Misty's body.
It's an animal hair. It found out to be dog hair. And Brent Huck had a dog.
The DNA really locked it in. This is the dog. It's not just the breed of dog. This is the dog.
In October 2002, Brent Huck is indicted on kidnapping and first-degree murder charges. Key to proving his guilt is the reconstructed timeline.
I think Misty got home from work. Brent was out partying. He hears the rumor that she's telling people that she's pregnant with his baby. So Mr. Huck has got to do something about this. He has Misty claiming that she's the mother of his baby, and he cannot afford to let his new girlfriend hear about this. He's got to shut her up somehow.
He ends up home probably around 2 o'clock. He's mad, he's a hothead, he's arrogant, he's spoiled.
He called her, probably under the pretense to come over and have a sexual relation that they normally have.
He drove there, he called a quick I'm downstairs. That explains for the very, very short call that lasted like 10 seconds. She goes downstairs, gets in the car, off they go to his house.
The whole time I think he had it in his mind to go ahead and kill her.
He was able to incapacitate her. He got her tied up, her hands, her feet. Weighed her down with these bags filled with rocks. And took a roll of duct tape and wrapped her head. He puts her in a boat.
At this point, Misty is still alive.
I think that she struggled to get loose. She moved her head around, got the duct tape off of her mouth, begging for her life. He rolls her off the boat in the deepest part of the river. And she sinks.
I think he dumped her in the river while she was alive, knowing that she was going to die.
Despite the strong physical and circumstantial case against him, Huck pleads not guilty.
I don't want to say it's an airtight case, but we're very confident in our case. How do you explain all this? You can't. I think he thought that he could get away with this, maybe a plan in his mind how he was going to do this and how it was going to pan out, but things weren't going his way.
I remember, I think I was holding my breath, and all my muscles were clenched up. And as soon as they said guilty on both counts, I remember, thank goodness.
28-year-old Brent Huck is sentenced to life in prison.
Is it justice? I think justice would be let her daddy spend an hour with him. That would be justice.
I don't want him dead. I want him to spend the next 500 years in jail. And I want him to remember every day of his life what he did. So whatever anyone calls justice, I don't feel it. I'm just glad that he can't do it to anyone else.